April 7th, 1739. York, England. A large crowd gathers near the gallows, waiting to see a man hanged. He's wearing fine clothes, he looks calm, he even bows to the people, then jumps off the ladder himself. His name? Dick Turpin. To the crowd, he's a hero, a bold outlaw, like Robin Hood. But what they don't know is this. Turpin was not a noble robber. He started as a butcher. Then he stole animals. He joined a gang, broke into houses, and later even killed a man. He ran from the law, used a fake name, and almost escaped. Even when he was caught, people didn't know who he really was until it was too late. After his death, books and plays changed his story, turning him into a legend. But the real story is much darker and stranger. So, how did a small-time thief become England's most famous outlaw? And why do people still remember him almost 300 years later? Dick Turpin was born in 1705 in Essex, England. He learned to be a butcher, working with his father and later running his own shop. At first, he seemed like a normal man, cutting and selling meat. But behind the counter, he was hiding a secret. Turpin was part of a poaching gang, a group that hunted deer illegally. In those days, deer belonged to rich landowners. Stealing and selling one was a serious crime. Turpin didn't just hunt. He butchered the stolen deer in his shop and sold the meat to regular customers. They had no idea it came from crime. The gang became well known and dangerous. They broke into homes, threatened people, and sometimes used violence to get what they wanted. But when the law started catching up, the gang fell apart. Most members ran away or were arrested. But not Turpin. Instead of going back to a quiet life, he got even worse. He left the butcher shop behind and turned to the roads, where he found a new way to make money: robbing travelers at gunpoint. Turpin was no longer just a thief. He was now a highwayman. But what made highway robbery so tempting back then? And how did Turpin become one of the most feared names on England's roads? By 1735, Dick Turpin had fully changed. He wasn't a butcher or poacher anymore. He was now something far more dangerous, a highwayman. Turpin joined a gang that robbed stagecoaches, the carriages people used to travel between towns. These coaches often carried rich people, and sometimes gold or jewelry. They waited on quiet country roads, far from help. When a coach came near, they jumped out with guns and shouted, "Stand and deliver." This meant, "Stop right now and give us everything you have." For people in those days, this was terrifying. Travel was slow and risky. There were no phones, no police nearby, just the open road and the fear of being robbed. Turpin and his gang didn't just steal. They became known for their cruelty. Some victims were beaten. Others were left tied up in the cold. Turpin was not the gentle outlaw that stories would later claim. He was rough, greedy, and violent. His name spread fast across the country. People were scared to travel. The law was now watching him closely. But Turpin's worst crime wasn't on the road. It happened in a small house in a quiet town. And it would change everything. After many robberies, Dick Turpin and his gang needed a place to hide. They found it in Epping Forest, a huge dark woodland outside London. It was the perfect spot. Thick trees to block the view, hidden paths to escape, and no police brave enough to go deep inside. From this forest, they kept attacking. They stopped travelers on quiet roads. They even went into homes nearby, tied people up, and tortured them to find where they kept their money or gold. People were terrified. Turpin didn't act like the cool robber we hear about in old stories. He was more like a gang leader with no mercy. He carried loaded pistols, rode a fast black horse, and was ready to hurt anyone who got in his way. The gang would sit by campfires at night, counting their stolen goods. Bloodied saddlebags, dirty coins, and whispers about their next hit. But with all the crimes piling up, why wasn't Turpin caught? Turpin kept moving, changing his name, and hiding deep in the woods. He used fear and clever tricks to stay free. But he couldn't run forever. Someone would make a mistake. And that's when everything would fall apart. After killing a man named Thomas Morris, Dick Turpin knew the law was closing in. So he ran far north, away from London, to a town in Yorkshire. To stay safe, Turpin changed everything. He grew a beard, he wore fine clothes, he gave himself a new name, John Palmer. He acted like a rich man. He bought horses, stayed in good inns, and even made small talk with local leaders. Nobody knew he was a wanted killer. But Turpin had a bad temper. One day, he got drunk, took out his gun, and shot someone's chicken during a fight. That was enough to get him arrested. At first, the police had no idea he was Dick Turpin. He called himself John Palmer. But something didn't feel right. He had money, but no clear job. They put him in jail to investigate further. From jail, John Palmer wrote a letter to his brother-in-law asking for help. But the letter was sent without a stamp, which meant it went through the postmaster who had to collect payment. The postmaster got curious and showed it to someone from Essex, Turpin's hometown. That person recognized Turpin's handwriting, and his true identity was revealed. After years on the run, a simple letter gave him away. While in jail under the name John Palmer, Turpin felt nervous. He knew things were falling apart, so he wrote a letter to his brother-in-law asking for help and money. But Turpin made one mistake. He didn't pay for a stamp. At the time, if a letter had no stamp, the person receiving it had to pay. The letter passed through a postmaster who got curious about this John Palmer in jail. He showed the letter to someone from Essex, Turpin's hometown. That person was a former school teacher who had once taught young Dick Turpin. He looked at the handwriting and immediately recognized it. He told the authorities John Palmer was really Dick Turpin, England's most wanted criminal. The news spread fast. The quiet man, sitting in a small Yorkshire jail, was suddenly known as a famous robber, gang member, and killer. People were shocked. The man who acted polite and calm in town had a violent past. Turpin's clever disguise was destroyed by one letter, and one person who remembered him. His trial was coming, and it would change how the world remembered his name. It was April 7th, 1739. The city of York was crowded. People came from all over to watch one man die, Dick Turpin. Turpin had been found guilty of horse theft, which was a serious crime back then. But everyone knew he had done far worse. Robbery, violence, even murder. He was sentenced to death by hanging, but Turpin didn't act afraid. On the day of his execution, he dressed in fine clothes, looking more like a gentleman than a criminal. He smiled, he bowed to the crowd, and then he jumped off the ladder himself, ending his own life before the hangman did it. The crowd was shocked. They expected fear. Instead, they saw confidence, even pride. This is where the legend began. People started telling stories. They said Turpin was brave, that he was a gentleman robber, that he only stole from the rich, that he was kind to women and clever with words. But most of those stories were not true. Many were made up years later, especially in books and newspapers. One famous book, written almost 100 years after his death, told of Turpin's wild ride from London to York on his horse Black Bess in just one night. It never happened, but the story was so exciting that people believed it. Turpin, the real man, had been cruel, selfish, and violent. But Turpin, the legend, became something else. A symbol of freedom, danger, and rebellion. The man died on the gallows. But the myth of Dick Turpin lived on. Even today, his name appears in movies, books, and pub signs. But now you know the truth. He wasn't a hero. He was a butcher, a thief, and a killer, turned into a legend by time. You've probably heard the story. Dick Turpin rode 200 miles from London to York in one night on his loyal horse, Black Bess. It sounds heroic, brave, and full of adventure. But here's the truth. That ride never happened. It was made up nearly 100 years later by a writer named William Harrison Ainsworth in a popular novel. He took the real Turpin, a violent robber and killer, and turned him into a romantic hero. In Ainsworth's version, Turpin wasn't cruel. He was noble, fast, and clever. He had a loyal horse, quick wit, and a good heart. People loved it. It was like a movie in book form. And just like that, a legend was born. The real Turpin had been hated and feared, but now people were naming pubs after him. Kids read about him like a cowboy. Some even called him England's Robin Hood. But why? Because people often prefer a good story over a hard truth. We like heroes with flaws. We love rebels who break rules, even if they were actually criminals. Just like Hollywood changes villains into misunderstood heroes, history did the same to Turpin. It makes us wonder, how many other legends were just rewritten criminals? Turpin didn't earn his fame with honor. He got it through myths, stories, and clever writing. The real story, much darker and much more real. Dick Turpin is remembered by many as a bold, brave outlaw. But here's the truth. His fame was never real. It was a story. He wasn't a hero. He wasn't kind. He wasn't riding through the night to save anyone. He was a butcher, a thief, and later a killer. He tortured travelers, shot a man, and hid under a fake name. And in the end, he died like many criminals of his time, on the gallows. So how did he become so famous? Because someone rewrote the story. Nearly 100 years after his death, a novelist turned Turpin into a legend. A fake horse, a fake ride, a fake hero. And people believed it. The line between being famous and being infamous is very thin. All it takes is a story, a book, or a movie, and the truth starts to fade. Turpin became a character, not a person. A name on pub signs, a figure in children's tales, someone to cheer for, not fear. But behind that legend was a real man. One who hurt people, ran from justice, and lied until the very end. Remember the hook? The man who bowed to the crowd and jumped from the ladder? He wasn't brave. He was desperate. And he knew the end had come. So here's the big question. How many other heroes from history were actually villains, dressed up in legend? How many stories have we accepted, just because they were easier to believe? Sometimes the real story isn't just darker, it's more important. Because knowing the truth helps us see the world clearer and ask better questions about who we choose to admire. Dick Turpin died a criminal, alone, feared, and forgotten. But years later, he was brought back as a hero in books and stories. A real man turned into a myth. This shows how history can change depending on who tells it. There's always more than one version of a story. One that's written to entertain, and one that tells the truth. Like if this changed how you see Dick Turpin. Comment if you want more real versus myth stories. Subscribe for more hidden truths from the past.